3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Hey, welcome to the No Half Cakes podcast. My name is Jim Sabelko, and I'll be your host for this journey. Today's episode is an amazing one. We are going to sit down with a good friend of mine, Sean McManus, and we are going to talk about what it means to be a father, what it means to be a husband, what it means to be a man, and what it means to do all of that coming from a faith-filled perspective, right? And not shy away from conversations that are a little bit controversial, or be willing to have core values and stand up for what we believe in. But live a life that is faith-led, that is purpose-filled, that is full of joy, and really do so in a way that is God-honoring, and again, does so in a way that shows up as a father, as a husband, and for yourself, right? Because this No Half Cakes life is about maxing out all those 6 different areas of your life. And we can't do that if we are not willing to be bold in what we believe in. So I want you to enjoy this conversation. I hope that you do. And let's jump into it. Hey, Sean, how are you?
I'm good, Jim. How are you doing, man?
Doing well. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. You can hear and see me okay?
Yes, sir. I got you.
Good. I love it. You all ready to jump in?
Yeah, man. Let's do it.
Good. Well, I would love that. And I'm pumped for this conversation. I think that there's not enough conversation around faith and men in particular. It's this kind of like taboo subject that most people tend to steer away from. And I love how boldly you go about doing that. So I'd love to start off with just kind of understanding, where does that come from for you? Like, what was the origin story behind why you decided to be so bold in your faith and make it such a big part of who you are today?
Man, I appreciate the question. Yeah, so first and foremost is I grew up watching parents that were very strong in their faith. So that is a leg up that I have on a lot of people that, not everyone gets blessed with parents that are just, that's what our life was about. Obviously we had fun. We did lots of stuff, but Jesus was in everything. And so I credit my mom and dad just for, raising us up in that way. And then even to the point that I was homeschooled along with my 6 other siblings, and for the sole reason that, even at that time, they didn't like where the public school system was going, and they wanted to make sure that our education was rooted in faith. So that's where that really comes from. And then, as I've grown up, as I've become a father, as I've become a husband, I noticed some things in my life that I didn't like, and some things that kind of I did, and habits that I had, and ways that I was shaped as a child and as a young man growing up in the church, and things that I really probably had misunderstood, and things that I really didn't see the church teaching, but things that were godly and things that I wanted to become better in. So I started kind of seeking out mentors in those areas, and I found a men's leadership group that was specifically for teaching men how to lead their families. And so that's kind of where my journey started, and then my eyes were opened up to kind of this problem that we have in church culture, in our society as a whole, but particularly in church culture, where, guys have just kind of been taught that they have to just shut up and be nice. We really aren't talking about that godly masculinity piece that is so important in our culture and in our world. So that's kind of where my journey started. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. And you spent some time in corporate, though, right? Before you kind of went out on your own to really pursue this?
I did, yeah. So I went to college, got a couple of associate's degrees, and then got out, started my corporate job right out of college, and stayed there for almost 8 years before I dove off on my own. So I did some kind of entrepreneurial ventures in that time frame, quote unquote side hustles during that time. But I was in the corporate world for 8 years before I finally made the jump.
And what was like the deciding factor to really go all in on yourself?
Man, so I'd been wanting to get out of that job for a long time, and I kept kind of sticking my toe in and doing different things. But my wife got pregnant with our second son, and at the time we had already had, my oldest son was 2 at the time. We were already pretty tight financially. We're a 1-income household, and we have been throughout our entire marriage. But so we were already pretty tight. So I knew when she got pregnant with our second son, I was like, all right, I've been wanting to get out of here for a long time. Now I'm on a time clock. Like, something has to change. So that was really the deciding factor. Once we found out we were pregnant, I was like, All right, time to make some moves.
I love that. That's a lot of pressure, right? To be a single income household. How do you navigate that?
Man, first of all, I think it's good. I have a lot of convictions around parents really taking a very active role in raising their kids, and particularly around, hopefully somebody doesn't murder me for this, but moms or wives being able to stay at home and raise kids, if they so desire to. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, but that's really kind of where I land on the spectrum. I think God gives us that job as parents, and I think it's really important. So that's kind of where I fall on that spectrum. And then obviously, it's something that my wife wanted to do. And then, look, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying ladies can't work. Like it's not where I'm at. But, so thankfully, she was like, hey, this is the most important job I'll ever have, is mothering these kids. And, God's given them to us. So it's our job to make sure that we raise them in a way that pleases him. And, we do that by having as much control over that as we can.
So let's jump right off the line there, because you've done an excellent job of kind of tiptoeing the line right there, because I know it's a touchy subject for a lot of people. But I am in full belief that one of the quote unquote problems we have is that our society does not glorify or give enough credit to the tremendous job that it takes to be a mom. Like when you look at the question of, hey, do you work? No, I'm a stay-at-home mom. I'm sorry, it's crap. When you were a stay-at-home mom, and my wife was for 10 years, she is doing more than most people in a 9-to-5 job, right? So unfortunately, our society doesn't give that position enough credit, right? So most people think, hey, you're trying to keep me in the kitchen, right? Or whatever the scenario is. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Hey, if that's what you want to do, I'm going to enable that as much as humanly possible. And if at some point, last year, my wife said, hey, I'm making a change. Our kids are old enough now. I want to go out and pursue something. Cool, go do that. But it's for the reasons of, I hate seeing it done for the wrong reasons. And I think that our society as a whole needs to give women more credit for, hey, what does a stay-at-home mom actually do? Freaking everything. And I hate seeing this competition of, is it as worthy as the mom who is also a C-level executive? Which one's more important? You can't make that distinction, right? It's a BS comparison. And I think we need to get back to, right, giving honor where honor is due. And I think for a lot of men in particular, that's a difficult conversation to have, because honoring your wife might hurt your ego, right? And for some men who are maybe a little bit immature in that or insecure in that, it's difficult to give honor to your wife and say, hey, you are a rock star and you are doing all these amazing things. Let me support you, because it somehow makes them feel less important as a husband or as a provider, right? Do you see that same thing?
So I think I think the way that God made men and women, men really crave respect. And then women really crave to be cherished and loved. So that's the distinction that I see. So when we think about, being cherished and loved, to your point, it's affirming your wife in, whether she's staying home or she's working. It's just affirming her and telling her that she's doing a good job in the things that you see her doing a good job in. And it's, just supporting, loving, encouraging, and affirming. And then in turn, also, we flip this around, because I think there's a really big problem today in society is, we've gotten so far into this, men and women are the same, and we've tried to push them together in this same lane. And it's like, God created us different. Men are really good at some things. Women are really good at some things. And he made us that way to complement each other. The problem is we mush them into this pile and think we all need the exact same things. And that's just not true. So ladies, if I could speak to you, I would say, respect your husband. I would say, that is what he craves. He craves that respect from you. And then guys, you need to love and cherish your wives, because that's what they crave as well.
So let's go on that for a second, because I love that point. What does respect look like? And I think the answer is, in my opinion, different for every person, right? But it's understanding to your husband, what does respect feel like? What are the actions that would make him feel respected? Right, and having that conversation, because I think there's a disconnect there too. When if you ask your wife, hey, do you respect me? Her answer is yes. But do you feel it? Right. And I think that that's a very important distinction to make.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I would say one of the biggest things that I see is or the biggest distinction that I could say in just like a broad spectrum, it's like, ladies, you need to stop treating your husband like he's one of your kids, because he's not. Now, on the flip side of that, husbands, you need to stop acting like one of her kids. Like, if your wife has to pick up after you, if your wife has to, remind you 100,000 times of what you're doing this weekend, like, if you can't keep up with your own schedule, you can't pick up after yourself. Like, if you're a slob in a household and you're putting stress on her because she feels like she has to treat you like one of the kids because she has to pick up after you, like, that's a freaking joke. Like, that's not a good example of masculinity. So that's one thing I see a lot is, there's the age old joke, and it's like, an older woman talking to a younger woman. She's like, "Oh, honey, you've got 4 kids," and the woman's like, "Wait a minute, I only have 3." She's like, "No, I'm talking about your husband too." Like, that's not funny. Like, if you're a man, right, you should not be confused as a child. So, ladies, stop treating your man like a child. Guys, stop acting like a child. Like, start acting like the man that is going to lead your wife and your family in the direction that you're supposed to go.
But I think it's an important distinction to make there too, not to overcorrect, right? Because I tend to see a lot of men who overcorrect into having to be the quote unquote alpha male, where they need to beat their chest and let their insecurities scream. Right? What does being a man really look like? Is it the loudest man in the room? Is it beating your chest? Is it bravado? Like, what does that look like?
No, it's none of those things. So yeah, we're not talking about that either, guys. We're not talking about, beating your chest and this is what you do and blah, 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 blah. So we are called as men to lead. The 3 legs of leadership are compassion, responsibility, and authority. So compassion is you love your family a lot and they know it. Responsibility is you are responsible for the outcomes in your household. You're responsible for the outcomes of your family. And then authority is you have the authority to make the decision that is best for your family. So when I say act like a man, that's what I'm talking about. When I say lead your household, it's standing on those 3 legs. It's standing on compassion, responsibility, and authority. If you're just compassionate, but you don't have the authority to make the decision that is best for your family, then you're not going to get anywhere. If you're just authoritative and you're just beating your chest and you're like, "I'm the leader in here, this is what you're supposed to do," your family isn't going to follow you and you're not going to be respected. And then the responsibility piece is taking the responsibility, putting that on your shoulders of, I'm responsible for the outcomes in my family, good or bad. Like, that's what that looks like.
So if we're talking about responsible for the outcomes of your family, and I'm being, I don't know what I'm being. I'm pushing back on some subjects just for the sake of conversation here.
Yeah, for sure.
But if we talk about being responsible for everything in your household, how do you navigate that without feeling like you have to be the one to do all the physical work? Right? Because I think a lot of men would tend to lean inward and say, "Hey, if I'm responsible for everything in my house, I'm going to hustle and grind harder than everyone, and then just outwork all of my problems until you just diminish your entire being."
That is an excellent question. So when I started going down this entire road of even family leadership and masculine leadership, I tended to go that direction. So we think about being a good leader. A good leader, one of the skills of a good leader is delegation. So when I say you're responsible for all the outcomes in your family, that doesn't mean that it's your job to do everything. It doesn't mean that you're the family butler. It doesn't mean that you're the family doormat. But you do have to, in some degree, take that responsibility piece, because what we run into is this victim mentality of, I'm a victim of my circumstances, I'm going to blame my wife because blah, 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 this didn't go how it was supposed to. And it's like, okay, man, well, how about this? Let's look in the mirror. Let's not, she's an adult. Obviously, she's responsible for her own actions. But let's look in the mirror first and say, okay, what could I have done differently to make this go smoother next time? Like, let's say we missed a date, for instance, and your wife is the one that typically resides over the calendar, because that's a big thing for a lot of guys. They don't know what's going on next weekend. She always does. Well, let's say that you guys missed a date that was important to you. Instead of just berating your wife and saying, "I can't believe you did this," how about you take some responsibility and you have a calendar built out in your own phone, so that way you can see what's coming up and you can go, "Hey, what about this weekend?" And she's like, "Oh my gosh, I forgot." It's like, great. Now we're both on the same page. You took that responsibility versus just saying, "Well, that calendar is her jurisdiction and it was her fault for us missing that." Does that give you kind of a good example, Jim?
It does. And I think if I could add a 4th leg of responsibilities here, it would be stewarding your time well. Because to me, that's such an important thing. I think if you really want to look at what it takes to be leader, you want to take what it takes to be a man, it's understanding time and stewarding that time well. And if you don't do that, and if you're not intentional with how you spend your time, that's hugely reckless. And honestly, it irks me to think that, someone would consider themselves just reckless with their time.
Absolutely, man. That's the one and only resource that we don't get back. You can always make more money, but you'll never, once yesterday's gone. That day doesn't come back again.
Yeah. I think too, when we talk about passing off fault or blame, I think that's a place that a lot of men find themselves in, right? When it comes to something not going their way. If they look at, hey, I'm responsible for the success of my family and such failed, who can I blame? Right? I think that's a very immature tendency. But there's a lot of men who will default to that because maybe that's what they've been modeled from their dad, or maybe they didn't have a dad growing up, and that's what they just witnessed from society. So where do you speak to someone who exhibits that behavior where they're looking to blame other people, where they need to stop and start taking accountability for themselves, right? Where they need to say, hey, I can't put my future in someone else's hands. I need to understand at the end of the day, I am responsible for who I've been called to be. I need to start acting like it.
Yeah. So I think the first piece that I would hit on with that is, it's like, hey, God made you. So before he gave you a wife, before he gave you these kids, because most of the guys that I work with, most guys I talk to are family guys, but before he gave you those things, he made you. And you have a limited time on this earth. You are responsible for what he's given you, because everything, if we go by the Christian faith, everything that we have is God's anyway. We're just stewards of it. So it's our responsibility to steward those things well. Now, if you're blaming someone else or if you're blaming your circumstances, then that's not you taking responsibility and stewarding it well. So the first piece of that is we have to look in the mirror. We have to take that accountability. We have to look at, what am I doing in my life? What am I not being intentional about? What am I not controlling that I can't control? Because obviously life gets a vote. Obviously there's circumstances that come up that you just have to deal with in the moment. But the biggest thing with the responsibility piece is just being able, like, controlling what you can control. We take physical fitness, for instance. If you're overweight, it's your fault. Like, I'm sorry, it is your fault. You're the one that put the food in your mouth. You're the one that decided not to exercise. Am I saying that there are circumstances that have come in that have made that harder or easier? Sure. But we all have circumstances in our life that we have to deal with. But it's just taking that first initial, like, hey, I am at this place in my life because of what I have decided is acceptable. Nobody else is going to live your life for you. Nobody else is going to come and do the things that you're supposed to do to improve and get better.
Do you think it's important at that point to have the conversation between fault versus responsibility? Because, I always, at least the conversation I have with my kids on this topic is anytime they say such and such was somebody's fault. So, okay, so now what? Like, what difference does it make whose fault something was? We're still here, right? We still have to figure out how to proceed. So anytime I hear the conversation of such and such was somebody's fault, to me, it's like, all right, cool. We understand whose fault it was. It doesn't make a difference. Now we need to look at who's responsible for fixing it and make that change, right? So is that the difference people need to understand about? It doesn't matter whose fault something is. It's ultimately their responsibility on how to move forward.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Because that's when we get back to what can we control? Like, there are other humans on this planet. You're married to your wife. Like, people are going to act differently. And when I say take responsibility for the outcomes, I'm not saying that everything's your fault. So, like, don't hear what I'm not saying there. But the thing is like, just like you said, Jim, when something happens, okay, it was so-and-so's fault. Cool. All right. No big deal. Now, what can you do specifically about it? What can you do to make sure that the outcome next time is better? Is there something that you can do to make sure that the outcome next time is better? Like, okay, like let's say two people got in a car accident. One person had their seatbelt on, one person didn't. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whose fault it was as far as the car accident is concerned. But next time, will you wear your seatbelt so that you don't get hurt as badly? Because that is something that is in your control. That is something that you could have done. So it's all about finding those things that you can control and then being intentional with them.
It's a good point, and it leads me to this next question: is how important do you think it is to understand the benefit of your failures and all this stuff? At least when I look at my own track record, my own life, version 2 has always been better than version 1, and I couldn't even count how many things I failed at in my life. It's to a point where I almost enjoy failing because I know, hey, the next version will be better. And it goes back to, you may not know now, but later you'll understand. Like, how important is that when it comes to leading yourself and just constantly moving forward and not fearing like this current position might feel like a failure. And I think for a lot of people, they could feel like, I don't know how to proceed, or I don't know, if it's going to work out. Right? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So I had a mentor tell me one time, and this is something that I have to replay in my own head. I've been I say a recovering perfectionist. I've been one of those people that will overanalyze everything sometimes to the point of not taking action because I'm scared to fail. Now, thankfully, I am not near that bad anymore because I've done a lot of work in that department. But failure is just feedback. We've been so conditioned, and part of it is a school system thing. I don't know if we have time to get into that, but we've been so conditioned to think that failure is final, and we've been so conditioned to think that we shouldn't make mistakes. But that's the only way that we learn. So if you're failing in something, like you just said, Jim, just know that you're going to do better at it next time. Like, you have to learn those life lessons. And we think about, I like to use examples. We think about a little kid learning how to walk. That kid's going to fall down 100 times minimum. But do they ever just decide one day that they're not going to walk anymore? No. They just get back up and try again. They're like, okay, well, I was a little off balance this time. Let me try again. So it's just that constant pursuit of always wanting to improve, whether that's yourself, whether that's your relationship, whether that's, your relationship with your wife, your marriage, your kids, at your job, in your work. It's just that constant pursuit of mastery and self-improvement. And as you move up in different levels, you're going to continue to fail. So it's just kind of reframing it as like, failure isn't final. Failure is just feedback.
And when you say that example, it makes me think about, as a 1-year-old or whatever age, that individual is going to learn to walk, you don't necessarily process societal pressures. You don't process the judgment and criticism of your peers, right? That's not even a thing in your realm of recognition at that point. And thank God it's not, because if you tried to learn to walk at the age of 20, you may never learn to walk. And I think if you understand that same principle there, and look at, hey, how many things could you possibly do if you just removed that? And that's something that's entirely in your control. You don't have to process those emotions, but you don't have to accept the criticism from other people. It's going to be present. I think, once you recognize you're always going to be judged from other people for everything you do, good or bad, doesn't matter. If you can learn to just shut that noise off and not let it sink in, how much more stuff could you do that you're holding yourself back from?
Absolutely. And that's so true. And it's not, we don't want to sit here and say that it's an easy thing to do, because it's not. We want to be accepted. So when we're not accepted, it hurts a little bit. But the more that you can understand, and part of this comes with time, and part of this just comes with taking action and understanding, like, hey, this is going to upset some people, but that's okay, because when I'm 85 years old and I'm laying on my deathbed, am I going to be thinking about, 40 years ago, I upset this person because of this action that I took? Or am I going to be thinking about, wow, I lived one heck of a life and I did what God was calling me to do because I trusted him, and because of that, I lived one heck of a life? Like, which one do you want? Because I guarantee you, when you're 85 years old, who you upset when you're 40 doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter when you're 40. It just feels like it does, because it feels like that, that's all there is, because we do desire to be accepted. But if we're speaking, from a Christian standpoint, the only person that I need approval from is God. So if I feel like he's calling me to do something, I'm more scared of what it looks like to disobey him versus, what someone else thinks that doesn't have the calling on my heart that I have.
So how do you walk that out when you don't necessarily know what that calling is? So I think that there's a lot of men who, they hear the whisper, but they don't necessarily hear the words yet. They can't necessarily make out, like, hey, what is my purpose? What is my calling? And they're trying to maybe piece together bits from other people's callings that they happen to resonate with, or they like. What does it look like to start walking that out when you're really early in faith?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is trial and error. There's an analogy that you can use. Is like, hey, if you throw a handful of darts at the wall, see which ones stick and try it. There's obviously the act of prayer and the act of like actively seeking God's guidance on those things. But then, you look at like, what do you enjoy doing? What do you like? Because God made one of you. So your makeup isn't exactly the same as anyone else's makeup. So your journey isn't going to look exactly the same as anyone else's. But, kind of take that into account. All right, what do you enjoy doing? What do you feel like you could do as quote unquote work and that you would actually enjoy? All right, cool. That's your first step. So then let's kind of start down that road. What would it look like to monetize that? How could you make a little bit of money doing that? So I think most guys, for me in particular, in my story, my hiccup was like, I always had to know, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? So, if I had this idea in my head, I'm planning the entire business. And if I don't know what the entire business looks like, then I'm like, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. And it's like, you don't need to know how to do the entire business. You need to be able to take one little step in the right direction. That's the only thing you need to do. And then once you take that step and you decide, I do kind of like this direction, or maybe I don't kind of like this direction, then you can take the next step. But we get so caught up in like this immediate gratification social media world that we live in, and this is me too, this isn't me preaching this, that we feel like we have to have everything planned out, and if it doesn't happen in a year, or if it doesn't happen in 2 months, then it's not good enough. Like,
Right.
what you don't see on social media, like if you're watching these successful people or people that you feel like are living out their calling, what you don't see is the last 10 years where they're doing exactly what you're doing, and they're quote unquote beating their head against the wall trying to figure out what the heck they're supposed to do. The difference in you and them is they started taking tiny steps, and they were okay. They weren't too good for small beginnings. They were okay to take those little steps in the directions that they felt was right. And as they were moving in that direction, they decided, yes, this is the direction I want to keep going, or they had to pivot and go another direction. But you can't pivot until you're moving. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm glad you brought that up too, because I think that there's this other perception that people like me or you have it all figured out. And I personally, I don't want to speak for you, but I'll speak for myself. I don't. Right? And there are moments that, even this morning, you don't necessarily know what to do. But what I like to say is the feedback loop gets smaller, right? So we'll still experience these same doubts or these same concerns, these same frustrations. But instead of 6 years ago where it might have thrown me off for an entire week, it throws me off for about 6 minutes. And now you get back to it. And I think that's part of what this journey looks like, is understanding how to shrink the feedback loop from feeling the emotion to how do you process it to how do you move forward. And it's really just about shrinking the time from when it starts to when it ends to when you move forward, rather than pretending it doesn't happen at all. Because we are not unicorns of people that we magically have all the answers. We never have to suffer frustration ever again, right? Am I on target there?
Man, I wasn't going to share this today, Jim, but I wanted to share something with you and your audience, and I have no idea what I'm doing. But yeah, like, you're so right, man. It's just about taking small steps. And I love what you said about, hey, it takes me less time now than it did, a couple years ago to figure out what I need to do next. And again, we kind of go back to that immediate gratification that we're so used to now. If we can like back up and look at everything from a bird's eye view, I know so much more about my business, and I've learned more about coaching and talking to men than I did a year ago. Do I know everything? Absolutely not. Are there times when I'm like, I got to figure out what the heck to do? Absolutely. There's still those times, but it's like you said, it takes less time now for me to figure out my next step, because I've taken the action, because I have mentors, because I have my own coaches that are guiding me through that process as well. So yeah, 100%. It's just about moving forward and moving in the right direction. And it's about being able to take those small steps at a time, because, most of the things that you want to do and most of the success that you want to have is not about you taking one ginormous step in one direction. It's about you taking up a bunch of little ones day after day after day to try to get you where you want to be.
Yeah, I love that. Have you ever done any like self-promotional video, like where you're, walking around talking to a video saying, whatever happens to be on your mind?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm thinking about right now is, when we talk about basically what we just talked about, right? Reducing that feedback time. If you've ever done that and you've ever, walked around speaking to your camera, there are moments where you pause, where you don't know what to say. Moments of silence. In an app like a CapCut or whatever it is, there's literally a button that says remove silence, right? And before you post that video to social media where you share it with the world, for the world to see what is on your mind, you press the button and you remove the silence, because it doesn't make a good video. But what we're doing there is we're removing the silent time, the quiet time that we have, where we're thinking about what to say. And I'm realizing now, when we're having this conversation, what we're doing is we're hiding the moments where we're figuring it out and only showing people the outcome, what we've already figured out. But we're actively hiding the quiet time. And I think that goes both ways. That quiet time where you spend thinking, reflecting in prayer, that quiet time is where you get the answers from. But we're not sharing that. And then as a result of that, people think, man, you've got to figure it out because you always know the right thing to say. Does that make sense?
Man, yeah, that's so true. And I've seen evidence of this in my own life, and I'm slowly learning. You know, I was talking about mentors and coaches. I've got a mentor of mine that I've been working with for a little while now, and he's really helping me on some mindset stuff. And because one of the things that I've really struggled with is, you know, I follow all of these highly successful people on social media, and, you know, I consume their podcasts and I read their books and, you know, all of the self-help books and the self-improvement stuff. And like you just said, it just seems like, man, these people don't have any problems. Like they know exactly what to do all of the time because that's what they show. And, you know, a lot of them now are getting more authentic, and they're talking about some of the struggles that they have, but it rewires your brain, at least it did for me, to think that there's no way I can do this because I'm not as smart as they are. Or I can't do this unless I quote unquote grind, you know, that hustle grind culture. I can't do this unless I spend 3 or 4 or 5 years away from my family working 16 hours a day. Because that's what you see. That's what's publicized. That's what's glamorized. And so I've even gone down that path in my business where it's like, I'm just working all the time and I'm having no time with my family. And then this goes back to that piece of the time is one thing that you never get back. I've got 2 little boys. One is almost 2 and one is almost 5. I don't want to miss these years, but I was quote unquote hustling because I felt like that's what I had to do because that's what everybody on Instagram does. And it's like, man, you've got to be able to enjoy the process. Yes, there are seasons of hard work. And if you want to do anything in life, there is hard work involved and there are seasons of that. But you have to learn how to do that and continue to live and continue to be okay not being where you want to be yet. And like enjoying the journey part of that process versus, you know, I can't be happy until I hit this goal. Or I can't be happy until I hit this achievement. Once I do that, I'll be happy. It's like, man, you're living in your good old days right now. Like whatever your good old days are when you're, you know, in your 70s or your 80s, you're living them right now. So don't miss out on those because you think you have to hit some arbitrary number of success because somebody's told you to on Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so true. You know, it makes me think of someone like a Gary Vee, for example, who, you know, I had this observation about him years ago where, yes, it's great to hustle and grind and kind of work your face off and do all this awesome stuff, but is that the life you want, right? Are you taking advice from someone who has the fruit in their life that you want in yours, right? The dude, and I don't want to knock the guy, but wound up being divorced. So now his relationship with his kids is never going to be the same as it was, and his children will never be the same as they would have been in a home that had, you know, a traditional marriage in it. Now, it's their situation. I can't judge on it. It is what it is, right? If you, whoever's listening to this, are in a traditional marriage with a couple kids and you're trying to compare yourself to his work ethic while still maintaining a great relationship and being a great dad, it's not going to compute, right? It's not, you can't compare yourself against someone who does not have the fruit that you are seeking in your life. It's just a recipe for frustration. And I think that there are so many people who try and do that where you want to have the discipline of a David Goggins to go out and run 200 miles, but you're also trying to be a great dad, right? You can't, you know, compare yourself against all these different things and then think that, you know, you're going to be able to master all of them without feeling some frustration and some misalignment, right? I think it's such an important part to have those mentors in your life that have the fruit in theirs that you want in yours. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's just 100% true. I think, like you said, I mean, we get so focused on social media. We get so focused on what everyone else is doing that we're like, oh, I'm not successful unless I do it like that. It's like, man, like you get to control your life. You get to control what you do, especially if you're, you know, whether you're working a job or not. You know, if you're working a job, there's not as much freedom as if you know, are running a business. You get to kind of judge your own hours. But it goes back to that piece that we were talking about earlier. Control what you can control. Just be you. Live the life that God has put in front of you and do it at the speed that works for you and works for your family and allows you to be the dad that you want to be and allows you to be the husband that you want to be and allows you to be the man that you're supposed to be. Because we forget when Jesus walked this earth that he lived his life at 3 miles an hour. Like that's the average speed of a man walking, 3 miles an hour. Like the man was never too busy to stop and, you know, do a miracle, heal a person, whatever it was, have a conversation. And we're over here and we just, you know, we keep our head down and we grind, hustle. And then we wake up and we're like, wow, 10 years went by, 15 years went by. Like my kids are going to college. And you're like, what happened to my time? Like, don't let that be you, man.
Yeah, I love that. But I want to thank you for this conversation, man. It has been, it's been an honor. I was trying to think of a word better than honor because this conversation has been that. But it truly has been an honor to have this conversation. And I do believe that a lot of people will be, whether it's healed, heightened, have their eyes opened, just understand that there is a better future for them if they start taking that step in exploring their faith and understanding kind of what they've been called to be. So I want to thank you for living boldly. It's a true pleasure.
Jim, it's been an honor to be here with you, man. And I hope anybody listening to this today, I hope you guys will just kind of reflect on where you are in life. What are you accepting? And what can you change and what can you control to show up as the man that you want to be? Because you're probably closer to it than you think. And it just takes some small steps to get there.
I love that. How can we best support you?
Man, yeah. So if you guys want to reach out, socials at the Sean McManus on Instagram and then at Sean McManus on Facebook. If you guys are on X or Twitter, it's at the Sean McManus as well. And then I'm also on the TikTok, which, I'm a little bit old for, but at the Sean McManus on TikTok as well.
Love it. Well, again, John, thank you. It's been a true pleasure, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds great, Jim. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Happy birthday to you.
Cha, cha, cha.
Happy birthday.